Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Samantha,
And I'm Thomas.
and this is Trans IRL.
We have a great show for you tonight. We'll be talking to our guest about raising gender open or gender creative children.
Yeah, we're also going to have a follow-up on our episode from 2 weeks ago with Neila Karassik. That'll be coming up at the end of the show here tonight. We'll be responding to some of your comments that you submitted in regards to that show. So,
yeah, let's get into our main topic tonight. Our guest is a transgender parent and activist.
Yeah, their story has gained international visibility as they have been openly and publicly raising their youngest child gender open. I'd like to go ahead and welcome Ari Davis to the show. Or Dennis, I'm sorry. I'll get your name wrong right off the bat. How's that?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sorry about that, Ari. Before we get into the story of your child and your youngest there, I would like to give you a little chance to introduce yourself a little bit and share a little bit of your story.
I'm kind of an oddball at heart in a lot of ways. Was even before I figured out the gender stuff, former theater kid, used to dance burlesque. I currently, am in a multi-adult household and spend a lot of my time, doing activism and whatnot, but also, do like watercolor painting and knitting. So.
That's awesome. Maybe we can dive a little bit into your story more specifically related to your gender identity. And maybe you can tell us a bit about the path that you've taken to kind of arrive where you're at today.
For sure. Yeah, I actually, I'm non-binary, but I didn't figure out the language for that until I was in my mid-20s. When I first, kind of started questioning my gender was when I was in high school in the early 2000s. And I distinctly remember saying to a friend of mine, oh, like if being gender neutral was an option, like that would be me. But since it's not, I guess I'm just not trans. And, then thankfully the conversation and like vocabulary surrounding gender kind of evolved over the next 15 years. And bam, I found that language and it really clicked for me. And almost immediately, like being non-binary means that you have to really deeply evaluate like the entire system of that gender is set up in major society, because it's on that binary, between, man and woman. And when you realize that you don't fit on it, like everything goes out the window.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and particularly like in terms of presentation, I have a lot of people that I talk with online and friends who identify as non-binary, and we have a lot of discussions about like androgyny and non-binary and how the two are often conflated. And do you have any feelings on just like presentation or like how you choose to present and how that kind of like mishes and mashes with your gender identity as well?
Yeah, so like I really don't like the idea that non-binary or androgynous look is like always a combination of masculine and feminine. And if it veers from a 50-50 split, obviously you're not really gender neutral, or you're not androgynous anymore. And like, I think that that's really destructive. Like I love wearing dresses and makeup and doing like a very, flamboyant look that way. And I'm no less non-binary. And for me, like, I think that we have these really strong associations, masculinity and femininity. Even like we try to like say, oh, well, it's not a gender anymore, but like we still say, oh, I'm masc presenting, femme presenting, XYZ presenting, when it's really like, I'm non-binary. So like when I'm in a button-up and a binder, I'm non-binary. When I'm in a floral dress, I'm non-binary. When I'm in, suspenders and lipstick, it's all non-binary for me.
Yeah, that makes
No,
a
I
lot of
appreciate you
sense.
sharing a little bit more of your story and your identity there too. I think it's important for Thomas and I, who are both very much on the binary, to have non-binary guests on here as well. It's such an important part of the trans community, and I know for me, I mean, I'll be very honest. I don't have a ton of non-binary individuals in my life right now, so getting to hear your story helps me as well, get a better understanding of what that identity is like. So thank you for sharing that.
For sure.
And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about your youngest. And I have to admit, the first time I actually heard about raising gender creative kids or gender open kids was one of our viewers made us aware of your story. And I really appreciate them reaching out to us and saying, hey, you should talk to them. You should talk to Ari and hear a little bit more about what they're doing over there. So I do appreciate that. We always appreciate show ideas from our viewers. But just talking about raising gender open kids, when did you first become aware that this is something that other people are doing, or this is an option for kids?
So I read many years ago, in the news articles about people who were choosing to keep their children's anatomy private. And I believe it was internationally, like in Europe, and then later in Canada. And it was just like maybe 2 or 3 articles, and they didn't use a lot of the like baby language that's getting thrown around now. But it stuck with me, this idea that you could do that. And I had already had Hazel by that point, which is why I hadn't, thought of using they, them for them. But when we as a family decided to have Sparrow, we already knew we were going to use they, them pronouns. Like we had learned about it as a concept before we'd even like started trying to have a baby. So
was there any discussion at home with your partners, or was it pretty much just, we're on board, we want to do this?
Oh yeah, no, I mean the conversation was always more how rather than will we, because it was like once we got the idea, it was really like, okay, but how feasible is it? Like philosophically, of course, we're 100% behind this, but in application, what does that really look like? So there was a lot of like just guessing, and like problem solving, and if this happens, what would we do then, more than deciding if we wanted to or not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm wondering, just like you brought up sort of philosophically, all of you being on board together, and I'm wondering if you can kind of expound on a little bit more of what that means to you. I know, of course, you yourself hold a non-binary identity, but when you really think philosophically about raising a child, what fully drew you to this concept and to wanting to walk down this road, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my belief is that all children start out not understanding gender as a concept. For those first early months and years, they just don't have the brain capacity and the mental emotional context and the language skills, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like the gender's in there, it's just not unlocked yet. But until they have the ability to conceptualize it or to verbalize it, or communicate it non-verbally, like they're what I would call anti-gender, like before gender, pre-gender. And I think that to assign the binary or even non-binary, to assign a gender or a sex based on, just external anatomy is what most people are going off of. I think it's destructive and innately transphobic. Like we, as adults in the trans community and outside of it can say, oh yeah, genitals don't denote gender. Like for many people, they trend one way with one genitalia type and one gender identity, but we also know that there's, a huge percentage of people that don't. But we're just going to disregard that when it comes to infants. We're just going to slap one on them. Like it just totally ignores the like thousands of people for whom that is, toxic and inaccurate. And I also think that part of it is because of the level of like toxic gender programming that we have in society. Like when we assign a gender and a sex to children, we are then subscribing them to be a participant in the aggressive and constant programming. Like it's not that maybe, a child's home environment can be open and explorative and inclusive, but sadly, like even just the presence of binary pronouns signals to strangers and peers and society at large, like all of these assumptions about how to treat that individual. And regretfully, the only way to even curb that participation, like you can't remove a person from it completely. That's just society, but like to curb it is to, you know, kind of deny society the access to this personal information about that individual.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, kind of connecting to what you're saying when I think about like, how a lot of us are raised and how even we speak to children, and based on their perceived genders, the ways that we can talk to them, or even just the words that we use, the toys that we give them. We're all very familiar with that very like pink and blue toy aisle. Like you're right that there are a lot of ways in which those things get embedded really deeply just based on some very superficial things that we might know about or think we know about someone. And it makes me think too about interactions with like family and friends. So I'm wondering, it sounds like you and your partners were kind of all in on this idea and this philosophy and way of life from the beginning, which is great. But when it came to your family and your friends, and making this decision to raise your youngest as gender open, how did those conversations go? And was there teaching involved? What kind of things were you going through when it came to family and friend interactions?
Yeah, well, we've had both positive and not so positive interaction with family. My mother is very involved in our household, and she's very supportive and respectful. And it has been a lot of educating, but that's been the process like through my coming out as queer, my coming out as trans, and having trans grandchild. Like my mom's used to kind of learning and adapting. But my wife's family is completely removed from us, and there's not any communication because of disagreements about gender. So it's been hard. But as far as like friends and community, it was funny how no one was surprised. Like we never made like a big official like announcement. We just kind of talked casually about it super pervasively, like before we got pregnant, while we were pregnant, etc. So I don't think anyone assumed like that we were not going to use they them pronouns for the baby. And it was mostly just educated questions like, how do I respect you? How do I respect this child? Like what language? Just like logistic questions, really.
That's great that you had that much support, though, in your community there. It is interesting, though, with family and reactions to the gender conversation, right? Gender identity. I'm a parent. I have 4 boys of my own here. And as I've raised my 4 boys, there have been moments in time in their life where they've wanted to explore things outside of their stereotypical gender roles. And by and large, my wife and I have allowed them to explore those things, and they have, and nothing has come of it up to this point. But we don't stop them from looking at that. But I've seen other people raising their children where if their son reaches for a doll or a My Little Pony, where they literally forcefully remove that toy from the child, like it's going to do harm to them. People are so worried about gender constructs at such a young age. It's so wild, but it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that family holds that against you in this situation. That's hard to hear, but it's something that
Yeah.
In the trans community, unfortunately, we see more. Well, we see it prevalently. But going back to your youngest and going back to when Sparrow was born, I was curious if you ran into any logistical issues. Like you had mentioned earlier, right? Okay, we want to do this, we were on board, but what type of issues did you face once Sparrow was actually here?
Well, we had to make decisions about caregivers really, we couldn't casually just let someone watch Sparrow. It had to be, well, do we time it with a diaper change? Are they on the short list of people who's going to get to do a diaper change or a bath? Like just as far as like our friends and family that wanted to watch or help with the baby, like the privacy aspect kind of came up as a consideration almost immediately. And then as far as like logistics, we had to work very consciously with our midwife team to get the birth certificate filled out in a way that was to our preference. And thankfully they were very accommodating, and like they called vital and statistics for us ahead of time and were like, what are the options? And, they were able to work with us as far as documentation. But because of the marker that is on Sparrow's birth certificate, we were denied a social security card initially. And we had to go in and reapply and like explain that there's no M or F on this baby's birth certificate. What do we do? And they said, well, our system doesn't like maybe the state has options other than M and F, but we don't. So you have to pick one. And I said okay, like to the clerk. I was sitting there like holding Sparrow on my lap, and so I said okay, well then just pick one. And I don't actually know which one they picked. So what it's the marker in the social security system is just whatever the clerk decided to code Sparrow as that day.
And this is an issue we run into quite often with trans individuals, especially in the United States, where each state gets to set their own rules and requirements. I think it's even worse for non-binary individuals. At this point, what is it? We're less than 10 states that will actually allow someone to mark a driver's license or birth certificate as either X or unknown or non-binary. It's depending on where you live in the country, you're going to get a different answer everywhere you go.
Exactly. There's no standardization. And at this time, we have not pursued getting a passport for Sparrow because like gender marker options for passports are limiting, to non-binary and intersex and trans people, but also, and to gender people. So we might cave and get one, but there's some, people that are like suing to get passport documentation changed. So I might try and see if that can change first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The paperwork of being trans is like always such a headache, and it can be so much work and so much emotional work. I mean, oh my gosh, even in going through my own name change, it's just a lot. There were so many highs and lows, and it's frustrating when even if you live in a state where you can feel like you're getting what you need, and then you go to the federal level and things can be completely different. And that lack of representation and safety and understanding in that crowd is just, it can be a real threat. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking as we're talking, how open you've been about your family's story and how you share it on social media and things like that. And I'm wondering too, what the response has been from the public and how you've been feeling about maybe media representation of your story and how interactions like that have been going.
Well, I have had, mixed responses. I did an initial interview in like 2017 with NBC, and that got like a little trickle of response and some positive messages. And then a couple people, saying I was corrupting the children. And then, or 2018 rather. And then in like January of 2019, I, did this larger interview with CBS. And then when that was released in February, I got a much larger response than I was expecting. I guess I was naive. Like I thought, oh, maybe a couple thousand people, but then it got viewed like hundreds of thousands of times on multiple platforms, like between YouTube and Facebook and everything. And then specifically conservative media picked it up, and literally articles talking about how I was a harbinger of the end days and things like that. So that was unexpected. And then a lot of people, because it was like a mainstream news station and not like an LGBT focused news station or something like that, a lot of people who had not heard about like gender open or gender neutral concepts, or even like non-binary identities, like people who had not heard about any of this stuff suddenly saw like this 5-minute segment on television, and then the online, and it hit an audience of people that just have, I think it's awesome that it was so new to them, but also a lot of people just literally didn't even understand what I was talking about, or understand the content of what I was doing. But for all of the people who've been upset or confused, I've gotten hundreds of messages from people saying that they supported me, or that they were considering now doing this because they'd learned about it. And so many people, both cisgender and transgender, messaging me saying that they wish that they had been raised that way, and that they thought that if they had been raised this way, like they would have a healthier relationship with gender and with their own gender. And I've heard stories of like colleges, listening to my interview with Piers Morgan in Scotland, and they changed their admissions paperwork to be more gender inclusive because they were like, oh, we can do that, so like just really great responses, honestly, for the most part.
That's good to hear. It's interesting with the media right now. The media is in sort of a weird in-between place where trans and non-binary stories are starting to be told, but there are still problems in how those stories are being told. You brought up Piers Morgan and his beliefs on the whole topic. And I mean, you did great on that interview, by the way. But I've run into issues with the media where they want to use old pronouns when referring to me in the past. They want to know what my dead name was so that they can use that as part of the story. And I've actually had interviews canceled on me because I refuse to be referred to with incorrect pronouns, and I refuse to have my old name used as part of the story. And this is a lesson I learned a very hard way. But I think it's important we're getting out there and we are sharing our stories, but it's important we also do it in a very smart way, right? And we're doing it in a way that isn't harmful for the rest of the trans and non-binary community as well. So you've done some fantastic work, some fantastic interviews, and I've been really happy with a lot of the interviews that I have seen with you. So you've done a great job with those.
Thank you. One of the things that really frustrates me is that, I've done some interviews where the initial journalist, got my pronouns right, referred to me as a parent, referred to me as, part of a multi-adult household and things like that. But then other journalists just kind of like skimmed their article and like copy and paste and change some things. And many of those like second or third degree removed articles, they refer to me as a mother, or they refer and use she, her for me throughout the article, or they refer to me as part of a couple, and even though there's more than two of us, or they just get a lot of those details wrong. And that can be really frustrating because I think like when it comes to stories like this, like the details of who we are like is important. I think there's something is lost in the message, and I think someone's missing the point if they can't read an article about me and get my pronouns right. Like, how can you do accurate, responsible reporting if you don't have enough understanding of the content?
Absolutely. And that's the thing we need to keep working on as we go forward here. And the media needs to keep working on and be aware that not everything is as you expect it to be. So I think that's an important point. I am curious now that Sparrow, how old is Sparrow now? Actually, I'll ask you directly first.
Sparrow is 15 months.
All right. So he's 15, they're 15 months old. What would you do differently, or is there anything that you would do differently if you had another child in the family?
That's an interesting question. Honestly, I really like how things went with Sparrow. Like I was so happy parenting Hazel that I was almost nervous to do it a second time because I was like, oh, how can you get it perfect twice? And you know, it's a different kind of perfect. You know, every relationship with every child is so different. But like with Sparrow, you know, people I think that the gender thing is like a constant nagging concern or that we like are hyper vigilant or whatever, but to be honest, it's so relaxed. Like our parenting is just so kind of, it's not a big deal. And I really like that aspect with Sparrow. And I think that I would definitely do that again. As far as things we might do different, more parents, more parents. 4 adults at the beginning was not enough.
As a parent of 4 kids, more parents is a good idea. And speaking of your family there, and you mentioned your oldest child as well, how has this experience, you know, changed and allowed your family to grow as well?
I think that Hazel has really blossomed into a new part of their identity, being an older sibling. Like it brings out this compassion and this empathy and this responsibility in them, and they feel so proud of their relationship with their baby sibling. And and part of that is being an advocate for them. You know, when they say even just the term baby sibling, people question. And Hazel, you know, has gotten so used to that about being non-binary themselves that, you know, they're prepared. They're ready with that answer with, yeah, my baby sibling hasn't told us their gender yet, so we use they them pronouns, and it's casual, it's effortless. You know, I mean, it still costs energy, but they're so practiced at it, and I think that gives them a general confidence in their life, you know, to advocate for themselves too, which is really great. um and I mean, it's definitely changed me. Like I've been an educator and I've been an activist, you know, my whole life. You know, I've always been passionate about teaching, but I did not know that I would go on this journey of having a realization and a passion on this level about how people can interact with their own gender and with children and help children explore their identities. Like Sparrow has taught me about this passion in me, which has been really, really wonderful.
That's awesome.
So beautiful, yeah. And I think I really connected with what you were saying about Hazel and just sort of their own advocacy and voice that they're growing through this understanding not only of themselves but of their, you know, adults in their life, of their sibling, and being able to talk with other people and explain um, which these details that are to many of us pretty intimate things. I mean, thinking about like my childhood, there weren't talks of gender going on, or there were, you know, these deeper sort of um, you know, sort of philosophical understandings of things and the nuances of these sorts of conversations. And I think it's really amazing to think about the kind of growth and learning that can be going on um, for children at such a young age, and they can get it and they can explain it and they can, you know, correct someone and educate someone and advocate for someone, and growing that voice at a young age, I mean, I think is awesome. I mean, I'm just like, it's really exciting to me to hear that and to like think about that, because I know for me that was not something that I experienced as a child. And you know, that I didn't have that voice and that self-awareness. So hearing that, you know, these sorts of approaches and just understandings and openness in life can like allow that to happen for children is awesome. And I am wondering if there, I'm sure there are, you know, other families out there who are watching this, listening to this, maybe right now, who are considering potentially raising their children gender open or gender creative. And is there anything that you would tell these other families or people that that are learning about this and maybe considering it for themselves and their families, is there any advice that you would give? Yeah.
Yeah, well, what I might say is that, it's gender open and gender creative parenting. It doesn't have to exclusively mean you don't assign a sex at birth and you use they them pronouns exclusively. It can be talking about and educating gender, beyond just saying, oh, you can be a boy or a girl or anything else. Like, that's a great start, but it's more about assertive educating, like showing them examples of people in your community, your friend circle, your family, or at least online, who are gender creative or are transgender or are, like exploring other examples of gender presentations, of gender identities, et cetera, et cetera. And realizing that it's not a passive education, that the passive, if you're passive in it, then society is the one who's going to do the educating, and that is going to be the rigid rules and roles and the binary thinking that many people, I think, are wanting to expand beyond.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing advice, and I hadn't really thought about it so fully. And thank you for like breaking this open to a whole other level for me. The idea that you don't have to jump into the full on sort of they them pronouns or things like that to be able to explain these concepts holistically to our children and know that they can understand it and talk about, like you're saying, not only gender identity, but gender expression and even helping them explore different expressions and have fun with it and learn through a very active process. I think that's really, really cool.
Definitely. There's a lot to learn. I'm still learning.
Yeah, and that's why I continue the education online a lot. Like, I encourage people to find me on, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and all that, because it is, it's something that, questions pop up over time, and as you have different experiences, it's not like a one class or one video and bam, you've learned everything.
Absolutely. So we do have some questions from our viewers as well. I do want to get to those here. And as a reminder, if you are watching live on YouTube or Facebook, submit questions in the chat there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Our first question, though, is up here on the screen right now. And that is, how do your children refer to you and your partners?
So I am Papa, which is short for parent. Like, I realize that, like, to a lot of people, it has like a masculine, connotation, kind of like another version of dad. But for Hazel, they came up with Papa as short for parent when they were about 3. And so I really like that because it was created by them through my transition, which was really cool. My wife, Brennifer, goes by Maddie. And then my partner, Luna, gets called like Auntie, or short like to T.
Really cool, really cool. So we do have another question here from our viewers. How can parents be better aware of gender bias when raising their children?
That's a wonderful question, and it's actually something that I'm starting to try and conceptualize kind of some curriculum on, because I get asked that question a lot. And I think part of it is mindfulness, which is a technique that you can hear about kind of in meditative circles or like mental health circles or things like that. But it's the idea of just like being very present and very aware. And I think that if people take time to sit with themselves, and when they notice that they have like a knee-jerk reaction to maybe a child playing with a different gender-associated object, or they have, a discomfort with the idea of a child or, someone doing a certain gender expression, to mindfully sit with it, hold it, and not judge themselves. Like, this programming is in all of us because of society. Like, guilt is part of it, but like to unpack it and to just like ask ourselves gently, why? why do I feel that this thing is for boys? Why do I feel girls can't do this? Or why do I feel that I'm worried about, what's going to come from this? And to have a dialogue with oneself, and to not just do it once, but, over all of the things, all of the assumptions that we have. And even over time, doing it not just with things that make us uncomfortable, but just with things assumptions we jump to. And over time, the subconscious, will start to relax these associations. And, it is, it's funny, but to me, it's to the point where if I'm in a mindset, I struggle to recall that these things have a boy or girl association. I just pick up a onesie and I put it on. I just pick up a toy and I play with it. And I think that people can get to that point with active deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
Great answer. Looks like we do have one more question from our viewers. And our last question for now is, do you worry about your child being bullied for being gender creative?
I think every parent worries about if their child is going to be bullied for everything. I definitely have wondered what being raised, using they, them pronouns is going to mean for Sparrow in the future. But to be honest, they have the gift of being part of a polyamorous, transgender, queer household. They're gonna stick out, and they're gonna have to educate about who they are and where they come from. Even if I had assigned them a sex and gender at birth, they would not have dodged standing out. And I don't want to ever judge myself or feel guilty or tell myself that I did wrong by a child by putting them in a family that's visible. And similarly, I wouldn't want to say I've done wrong by a child by giving them an experience that makes them more visible.
Yeah, I think it's something we're kind of hypercritical about ourselves, or at least I am. I know that my transition and the fact that now, my children have two moms is something that will garnish attention as they continue to grow up. But at the end of the day, I think that it's much better for them to be in a loving household, to be in a household surrounded by parents that care for them and love them and treat them well than any other option out there, And to your point, the education, the opportunity to help others understand that our family may not look like yours, but it's just as full of love is important. And that's so important, especially for those kids growing up in today's world, because those are the kids that are going to be running this place in a couple of years. So I think it's a good thing overall. And of course, we'll take the bad with the good, and hopefully there's less bad as the kids keep getting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the end of our online questions. And I've learned so much here. Like I said at the start of this, I am still learning so much within the community. Just because I'm here doesn't mean I'm an expert on all of it automatically. And I don't think any of us are. So, Ari, I really appreciate your time with us here tonight, giving up your evening, staying up late to join us. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really love getting to unpack this with people.
Yeah. Really wonderful conversation. You talked about your Instagram and Facebook page a little bit earlier. Obviously, we want to let everyone watching know you should definitely check out Ari's pages. They do a fantastic job of sharing their latest family goings on and interviews. It's a really great resource for other families who are also raising gender creative children. So Ari's Insta handle has been on the screen here, Ari Not Sorry. And the Facebook is the same name as well. So definitely want to make sure
just
that people
Ari Not Sorry. Yeah.
There we go. So if you'll hang on with us for a few minutes, we are going to hop over to another segment, but we do want to have you on for the end of our episode, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds great.
Great. Thanks, Ari. All right. So now we have a follow-up to an episode with Neila Karassik that we had 2 weeks ago. As you may remember, this was our episode about trans representation in television and film.
We had a blast with Neila, so much so that we invited her to join the team as our resident TV and film expert. And hashtag, she said yes. So you'll be seeing much more of Neila here on Trans IRL in the future, and that's including tonight.
So going back to her episode from a couple of weeks ago, we had a ton of comments and a lot of feedback on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And we wanted to have Neila come back on and join us with a little bit of a closer look on some of those comments.
Thanks, Thomas and Samantha. We had so much fun a couple of weeks ago deconstructing these films that really impacted us through our lives for better and also for worse. And one of the most exciting parts about that was to get to go and read the comments after and see how much we all had in common and how much we all kind of had different takes on the same subjects and the same films. I really find that exciting, and it kind of brings us together, and it's kind of cathartic. One film that was frequently brought up with, probably the most popular film, was Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, which is a family film from the mid-90s starring Jim Carrey, which launched his career. And one of the most kind of frequent comments came up was the film's age, and that the film is 25 years old. Like a lot of the films discussed, they're not necessarily from this era, and they definitely show their age in a lot of ways. But in that time, there was a lot of misrepresentation. It was almost exclusively that way. So saying that the movie's 25 years old and doesn't necessarily mean that there's no battle to be fought. Not that we're trying to fight a battle, it's just you've created a work of art or some pop culture, and it's always important for consumers to be able to criticize and dissect that and unpack it, especially when it's a really personal film like that. So I think we're coming from a really good, sincere place, and everyone's sort of able to love whatever they love. There are still elements to all these movies that I really enjoy a lot. But Ace Ventura in particular is a family movie, and I always found it kind of very odd that it was so related to this other film that it references in the later act, which is The Crying Game by Neil Jordan, which is a far more mature adult film about someone who is transgender. Whereas in this film, as a lot of the comments did point out, this isn't a character who's transitioning because of their gender identity. They're transitioning because they're trying to get away with a crime, because they're a killer, or because they want to get revenge. So in that case, yes, a lot of time's gone by, but that was a really troubling time, I think, in the 90s. And having all that lumped together did create a lot of shame. And if you didn't know someone who was trans, or you were trans yourself, and the only trans person you knew was yourself, it was really hard to constantly be hit over the head with this kind of idea that it's not just about transitioning to be yourself. Like, surely there's a darker, more sinister element to it, or you're trying to trick people, you're trying to trick heterosexual people, you're trying to trick everyone kind of into thinking you're someone else, you're trying to seduce people, or it's fetishized as in other films. It's really important to make that distinction. And there wasn't really that kind of forum like what we're doing right now, where people got to really break that down. In fact, 25 years later, Ace Ventura is still widely shown on network television and streaming services. And with that, that's all well and good, but now that it's kind of back out there in the public conscious, it's like great to get back into it and talk about it again after all those years from like a different, more enlightened perspective. So it's really important to me to kind of talk about that. And I was really pleased to know that a lot of people felt the same way as well. As for people transitioning, or whether they're gender bending in the film, or they're actually transgender in the film, other films we talked about, like Silence of the Lambs and Psycho, were loosely based on a killer named Ed Gein, who also influenced other films like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because he was a grave robber and a cannibal, among other things. And yes, he had a dysfunctional relationship with his mother, which did cause him to gender bend. So to not even really have these characters to be about them transitioning, which is far too kind of simplified or boring or personal, the filmmakers are far more interested in kind of lumping that together with kind of deception and criminality and murder. Because, you got to tell a kind of an epic story to entertain audiences. And when that's the only message you get, it can be pretty painful. So as much as those films have a lot of great aesthetic achievement behind them, and they're fun movies and I love them, it's just as important to kind of talk about and criticize the things that they didn't get right, or that have changed over the years and we wouldn't want to see in a film today. Otherwise, you don't really get that kind of progress. So Over to you, Samantha and Thomas. I'm really curious to hear what you guys have to say about it a couple of weeks later, and if you've had time to kind of sit on it and read some of the comments.
Thanks, Neila. Yeah, it was really interesting, and I really loved some of the conversations we had. I think we had more responses on this episode than any of our other episodes so far. To your point, a lot of these characters aren't transgender in the traditional sense of transitioning because of dysphoria. They are transitioning for these nefarious reasons. And I mean, that in itself is problematic, whether they're psychopaths or they're trying to get away with something else. As far as the public's concerned, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter why these people are transitioning or why they're hiding their identity. In that public consciousness, people lump all these characteristics together with other trans individuals. And we had a lot of comments where people call out these characters from Silence of the Lambs and Psycho, where, well, no, they're not truly trans. And you're absolutely correct. But if you were to ask someone on the street if Buffalo Bill was transgender, you'd probably get a yes out of that. And that's where we run into the issues with these films, where they, even though some of them are very old, I mean, Silence of the Lambs, Ace Ventura are both, 25 plus years old at this point. Psycho is over a half century old at this point. But those problematic images are still a concern today, whether or not the character necessarily fits perfectly into the trans spectrum. And that's one of my biggest concerns with these representations.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point to try to make that these films are older, or saying like, oh, this was made 25 years ago, and like, you could say like things were different then, or like yada yada yada. But I mean, that really doesn't come off very well for me, because I mean, even if I just think about my own life and my own transition, say, I expect a 25-year-old to be able to like interact with me correctly, or I expect an older person in my life who may have grown up in a different generation, if offered, an understanding of who I am, to be able to be respectful and approach me with the respect that I deserve. So I don't really see where like the overlap between this sort of excuse making is how it kind of feels to me, as kind of an excuse of saying like, oh, these are older movies and things like that. I mean, I think there's still plenty of opportunity for people who were involved with these movies to even come out now, today, and say, hey, this wasn't very well treated, and we apologize for that, and it was disrespectful to the trans community and things like that. I mean, I think there are broader conversations that can be had beyond just saying, oh, it's an older movie and that's just how things were, because that's not how things were for a lot of people. I mean, they're transgender people of all ages. We exist, we're everywhere at all times. So, it doesn't really work for me.
I agree wholeheartedly there. And another big thing that was brought up in the comments and feedback in the episode was we only touched on a very small percentage of films that deal with trans individuals and trans characters. And I think that's important to bring up as well, because there's a lot more to share when it comes to these representations. And that's why we're so excited to have Neila join us here on the show. And going forward, we will reach out to her for her feedback and insight on representation of trans individuals in the media. So we're very excited to have her join us here as a regular correspondent. So thank you, Neila, for your addition here this week, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon. Before we get too much further into the episode here, we do have a quick programming note. Next week, the Trans IRL team is actually going to be taking a break. Imagine that. We actually have a week off. That means no show next Thursday. But in 2 weeks, we will be back with an all-new live episode. Our guest is going to be Brax Fleming. And Brax is the founder and CEO of Stealth Bros Co., a company dedicated to creating bags for carrying hormone and shot-related supplies on the go. We'll be talking with Brax about his life, story, and company.
It's sure to be a great interview. We hope you'll be joining us 2 weeks from tonight. That's same time, same place, just 2 weeks from now, 7:30 p.m. Pacific, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube and Facebook. And if you want to get notified when we go live, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Trans IRL. All of our past episodes are available there. We're also on Facebook as Trans IRL Show and Instagram as Trans IRL. So please be sure to like us and follow us on all of those places.
All right, we do have Ari back here. Ari, thanks for sticking around with us tonight, and thank you so much for providing a little insight into your story and family.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
It was
Really
so
wonderful
fun, Ari. It
conversation.
was really great.
So I do want to thank Ari, Thomas, and Addison in our control room for all of their help here tonight, and Neila as well for her correspondent work. Thanks everyone for watching. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. From everyone here at Trans IRL, have a great night.